Mr. Speaker, and it's always an honor to rise in this place and to speak on behalf of the good people of Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna. I will inform you, Mr. Speaker, that I also have the honour of sharing my time with the honourable member from Richmond, Marpole. Now, this past week, Canadians, particularly British Columbians, received deeply troubling news. A new survey from the Business Council of British Columbia found that nearly 3/4 of businesses plan to reduce investment and 1/3 plan to reduce hiring because of the growing uncertainty around property rights and land title in this country. Now, this uncertainty is not theoretical, Mr. Speaker. It is very real. It affects homeowners, employers, municipalities, and investors who believe that in Canada, fee simple ownership meant certainty. Now, since the Cowichan ruling, Mr. Chair, I have to say I've received calls, and I was a bit shocked because Westbank First Nation is in the heart of Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna, and they sit side by side with the city of West Kelowna. And I had people that live in Westbank First Nation ask questions about their property and whether or not their investments were safe. And it's not surprising, Mr. Chair, because today's debate is really around a simple question. Because people in my riding are asking us, will this House of Commons stand up for Canadians who followed the rules and invested their life savings, or will you allow uncertainty and inaction to undermine private property rights in Canada? Business leaders are clear about what is driving this concern: increased costs, delay, complexity, and unpredictability caused by this court ruling, policy reversals, and an ever-changing legal landscape. As a result, investment, Mr. Speaker, is being shelved. Jobs are at risk, and confidence is eroding. What we already know is alarming. Fee simple titles held in the city of Richmond, by the federal government and the Vancouver Port Authority are now potentially invalid or effective due to this ruling. What we do not know yet is the full impact on private landowners, people who worked hard, followed every rule, paid their taxes, and put their entire life savings into their homes and businesses. They are worried, and rightly so. Now, when these concerns are raised, members opposite respond by accusing critics of fear-mongering or spreading misinformation. This is what Liberals tend to do when they do not have a substantive answer to serious questions. Because these are serious questions. To those making those accusations, I would offer this. It was this Liberal government that adopted Litigation Directive 14. That directive restricted the arguments Crown lawyers could make in court to defend fee simple property rights. That is not rhetoric. That is documented policy. Litigation Directive 14 is not fear-mongering. It's a fact. It's an inconvenient fact for the Prime Minister and his government, one that they have refused to explain why this is still on the books and instructing lawyers within their employ. The Prime Minister has been asked repeatedly why his government has continued with this directive, and he has continued to avoid giving a clear answer. Why did this Liberal Prime Minister refuse to stand up for property rights, Mr. Speaker, when it mattered? That remains unanswered. But what we do know now is after the damage has been done, the Prime Minister says he disagrees with this court decision. He now says that private property rights are fundamental and that his government will defend them. Well, I'm happy to say, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will have that opportunity with this motion. This Opposition Day motion gives the Prime Minister a chance to match his words with action, something that is increasingly difficult for this Prime Minister. Will he vote to defend private property rights, or will he vote against them once again? This motion proposes practical, substantive, and achievable steps to help restore certainty and confidence. First, it calls on the government to put private property first in the Cowichan case by clearly arguing that fee simple ownership has priority. I've heard the term viable answers or viable arguments, Mr. Chair. That does not necessarily mean they are making every argument. Now, second, it calls specifically for Litigation Directive 14 to be replaced with a clear requirement that the federal government aggressively defend property rights in all litigation. Third, it requires that no agreement can be concluded without explicit protection of fee simple property rights in all future negotiations with First Nations, so everyone understands and has some certainty, something that has been failed to have been done under this government and its predecessor. Fourth, it demands a concrete plan from this Prime Minister within 30 days, complete with timelines to protect Canadians affected by the Cowichan decision and the Musqueam agreement. Finally, it establishes a special parliamentary committee to examine every legal, constitutional, and political tool available to protect private property rights in Canada. Now, Mr. Speaker, these are not radical proposals. They are not ideological. They are responsible. They only become controversial if one does not believe that private property rights are fundamental to our system, both in terms of our system of capitalism in this country and in our Westminster system. We've always honored these things. And the lack of certainty that we see today is causing real harm. It is freezing investment, encouraging litigation, and forcing Canadians into a legal limbo with no clear path forward. Now, this is despite all the Prime Minister and his Liberal members of Parliament, as I've heard described in the Toronto Star, his deputies. They are all describing that everything that Conservatives are saying is not true. So, Mr. Chair, it should not be this way. Behind closed doors, negotiations are occurring with public tax dollars on the line, while affected Canadians are left without consultation, clarity, or protection. Lawyers disagree. Experts disagree. Lawsuits are multiplying, and government is failing to protect the interests of some of the very people it claims to serve. British Columbia already faces enough challenges. One can look at softwood lumber, American tariffs, and a NDP provincial government that appears to have no idea of what it's doing. We do not need to add property rights chaos to that list. Well, I guess it already is, but we got to make sure that we pull that off the list. And this motion, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, is a way to do that. Now, this Prime Minister often says that we should focus on what we can control. Well, today, this motion, this House can control something. We can restore certainty. We can defend property rights. We can stand up for Canadians who, by every account, have done everything right. That's why I will be voting in favor of this motion. The Prime Minister himself has said private property rights are fundamental. Today, we will see if his words mean anything. So I urge all honourable members to support this motion and send a clear message. In Canada, private property rights matter. We hear the concerns raised by British Columbians. We know we have the means of which to address them, and that we are dedicated in service to ensuring that their rights, their concerns are addressed, not in some far-off land, Mr. Speaker, in some yet-to-be-determined time, but here, now, this Parliament, this country. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The essence of the motion that we have before us today is to try to give a false impression. An impression as if the government does not support private land rights, which is just not the case. Every Conservative member knows that, Mr. Speaker. The damage, I would suggest, by bringing forward even motions of this nature that mislead significantly is at a great cost in many ways. We talk a great deal about reconciliation, and this is a step backwards. The Prime Minister, the Minister responsible, have made it very clear. The question I have for the member is, why is the Conservative Party wanting to promote fear when there is no need to do so?
The Honourable Member for Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, Liberal members continue to throw out any concerns as misinformation. You know what's not misinformation? In 2019, the Liberals adopted Litigation Guideline number 14, telling federal lawyers to avoid defending property rights. That directive is still in force today, despite multiple calls by Conservative members for this Prime Minister to show Canadians that he means what he says. He has yet to take us up on that offer. And Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, when we have Liberals say it's all misinformation, it's on the government website. If it's misinformation, is the government now the biggest misleader on this particular case? Because if you read the website, that's what it says. That member can't say otherwise because it's the truth.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson Nicola.
It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson Nicola, and I thank my colleague for his impeccable speech. You know, we just heard from a BC member from Surrey, and I've got to say, it sounds like a bureaucrat wrote the speech, and the reason I say that is because he read the whole speech. In fact, I asked him a question, and he went and read from a piece of paper that had nothing to do with the question. My honourable colleague clearly wrote his own speech, and I'm wondering, what message does it send when the Liberals are just reading talking points, accusing us of fear-mongering? Why don't they go to the houses in Richmond? Why don't they go to the places in Vancouver and say, how do you feel about having a higher mortgage rate? How do you feel about not being able to get home insurance? Why don't they do that?
Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna.
Mr. Speaker, if you read any newspaper in British Columbia, you're going to read about the Mayor of Richmond, who has broadly raised this issue while the province and federal government said nothing. They made clear representation on private property rights. All we are asking in this motion today, and of Liberal members, is to start listening to British Columbians and those that they have elected who have been raising this alarm. They've had lots of time, Mr. Speaker. The fact that they're now sending out members from British Columbia who are just reading talking points, basically giving the same line without concrete action, says to me they're prepared to vote against this because they truly do not protect the private property rights of British Columbians or anyone else.
Comments. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford. About 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the Liberals repeatedly failed to answer my question on extinguishment and their failure to use that argument in the BC Appeals Court and therefore legally not being able to use it in the Supreme Court. They mislead Canadians. They give a false impression. They say every viable argument because they know they cannot say every argument. Is this, for my honourable colleague, is this just another Liberal illusion? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Okanagan, Lake West, South Kelowna.
You know, Mr. Speaker, when we have Liberal members rise and talk about that this is all part of reconciliation, you know, a judge in New Brunswick had a very different interpretation. In fact, when there was talk about, in a court case in New Brunswick about extinguishment and how that related to private property rights, the judge actually identified that the one way to draw reconciliation back, to dial that back in a negative direction, would be to put the people that I mentioned, those homeowners, those business owners who have done everything right that's been asked them under the law and puts their private property rights at risk. It causes frictions between First Nations in British Columbia, in Canada, against the interest of them. And now this government is making it all worse. We need to work together to get back to a situation where everyone is comfortable with those relations moving forward.